Rex had once lived a life of luxury with his beloved master, but now he searched through the garbage for scraps. His ribs showed beneath the patchy fur. His paws were caked with mud, his once glossy coat dulled by days of dust and rain. The night air smelled of damp paper, rotting fruit, and sour milk. Around the edges of the dump, stray dogs fought over bones. Rex stayed apart from them, nose low to the ground, picking through piles of torn plastic. A truck rattled by on the nearby road, splashing through a puddle. The sound made Rex flinch, ears flattening, but he didn't run. Hunger had made him bolder than fear. He nosed aside a broken carton and found the end of a bread roll, hard and wet from the rain. He carried it to a quiet corner and ate it quickly, barely chewing. A gust of cold wind swept across the empty street. Rex shivered. He had once slept on soft rugs under warm lamps. Now the cold bit through his thin fur as he curled up beside a dented trash bin, trying to make himself small against the night. Headlights appeared at the far end of the road. A long black car rolled slowly toward the dump, its polished surface shining even in the weak streetlights. Rex raised his head, ears pricking. Cars sometimes meant danger, stones thrown, angry voices shouting. He stayed still, muscles tight, ready to run. The car slowed as it neared the garbage heap. The window slid down with a quiet hum. A man leaned out, his face half-lit by the dashboard glow. His hair was neatly combed, his coat dark and expensive. The scent of fine leather and soap carried faintly on the breeze. The man's eyes rested on Rex. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, the gaunt stray and the powerful stranger. Then the man reached beside him, took out a small paper bag, and tossed it gently onto the ground. The bag landed a few feet from Rex, spilling out a sandwich, still fresh, the bread soft and pale against the dirty street. Rex hesitated. His tail twitched low, uncertain. But the smell of meat pulled him forward. Step by careful step, he crept closer, keeping his eyes on the man. The man didn't shout or move to scare him away. He only watched, his expression unreadable, something like a faint sadness in the corners of his mouth. Rex reached the sandwich, sniffed once, then grabbed it and backed away a few steps before settling down to eat. The taste was rich, the first real food he had had in days. He ate every crumb, then licked the paper as if trying to hold on to the flavor. The car's engine purred softly. The man remained at the window a moment longer, still watching. Then he spoke, almost to himself, his voice deep but quiet. "Hungry fellow, aren't you?" Rex tilted his head at the sound, ears flicking. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone was not harsh. The man dropped the empty paper bag onto the seat beside him and tapped the car door once. The window slid up. The car moved on, its taillights glowing red in the darkness until it turned a corner and disappeared. Rex stayed where he was, watching the street long after the car had gone. He licked his lips, then lay down again, curling his body tightly against the cold. Yet his eyes remained open, fixed on the direction where the car had vanished. For reasons he could not name, something in him had shifted. The scent of that man, the way he had paused and looked, the warmth of the fresh food, it lingered in Rex's memory like a small flame in the night. Morning came gray and damp. Clouds pressed low over the city as shopkeepers dragged up their shutters. Rex wandered near the edge of the street, sniffing at bits of trash that had washed out of the dump with the rain. No other car stopped. No other hand offered food. By noon the sun broke through, weak but welcome. Rex lay in a patch of light near a crumbling wall, dozing with one ear pricked for danger. Now and then the roar of distant traffic or the clatter of carts stirred him awake, but he stayed near the dump, as if waiting for something he could not quite remember. In the afternoon, he saw the same black car again. It moved more quickly this time, its polished sides flashing in the sunlight as it passed the dump without slowing. Through the closed window, Rex glimpsed the same man in the driver's seat, speaking into a phone, his face serious. Rex stood up, tail lifting slightly, a low whine in his throat. But the car swept on, joining the stream of city traffic until it was lost from sight. That night, hunger gnawed at him again. The memory of the sandwich returned, soft bread, rich meat. He prowled along the gutters searching for scraps, but found little more than wilted vegetable leaves. He returned to the spot where the car had slowed the night before and sat there as the street grew quiet. Far away, the city lights shimmered against the low clouds. A siren wailed in the distance, then faded. A pair of stray dogs trotted past, noses to the ground, but gave Rex a wide berth. He waited until the street was empty and silent, then finally lay down. His dreams were broken by restless sounds, the squeal of brakes, the slamming of a door, a burst of laughter from some late-night passerby. Yet each time he lifted his head, he found only the dark road stretching empty toward the city. Days passed. Sometimes Rex caught sight of the black car turning onto distant streets. Once he saw it stop at a traffic light, and for a few seconds the man's face was visible again through the glass. Rex trotted a few steps in that direction, but the light turned green and the car moved on. He kept returning to that same stretch of road near the dump, as if the place itself held the scent of that first kindness. On the fourth evening, the car slowed once more. It pulled over near the dump. The window slid down again. The man leaned out and tossed another small bundle, this time a handful of roasted chicken pieces wrapped in paper. He didn't say anything. He only watched as Rex crept forward, wagging his tail low, and began to eat. For a brief instant their eyes met again, the quiet, steady gaze of the man and the cautious, grateful look of the dog. The man gave a small nod to himself, then rolled up the window and drove away. Rex finished the food slowly, savoring each bite. When he was done, he sat on the curb staring down the street long after the taillights had vanished. He didn't know the man's name. He didn't know where he came from or why he had stopped. All he knew was that someone had seen him, fed him, and not driven him away. That night, when he curled up beside the trash bin, his belly no longer ached as much. Sleep came more easily. In his dreams he saw warm rooms, heard the echo of a kind voice, and felt again the softness of a hand resting gently on his head. Months had passed since that night by the garbage dump. The seasons turned, the air grew hotter, then cooler again. Rex stayed in the same part of the city, wandering near the alleys and the riverbank, finding scraps to survive. He often returned to the roadside where the black car had slowed, as if the scent of that kindness lingered there. But the car never came back. Rex grew leaner and tougher. His paws hardened, his fur grew rougher. Still, whenever he caught the smell of roasted chicken drifting from a street vendor's cart, he would remember the man who had once fed him. One damp autumn evening, Rex curled beneath a broken signboard near a small electronics shop. A row of second-hand TVs glowed in the window, showing the evening news. The shopkeeper had turned up the volume to draw customers. The voice of the announcer carried across the street. In a stunning turn for the city's business world, Joseph Kane, once hailed as one of the richest men in the country, faces a wave of lawsuits and protests after the collapse of his companies. The image on the TV shifted to a clip of a man standing at a podium surrounded by microphones. His hair was slightly grayer now, his shoulders tense beneath a dark suit. Even in the flicker of the screen, Rex recognized him. It was the man from the black car. The man who had fed him at the dump. Rex rose to his feet, ears pricked, staring at the screen. A low whine escaped his throat. The news clip showed angry crowds outside glass office towers. They shouted, waving placards. Some threw papers into the air. Then the camera turned back to Joseph Kane as he stepped away from the podium, his face pale and drawn. The announcer went on. Critics say Kane's empire crumbled due to years of mismanaged projects and risky deals. Once a symbol of success, he now faces bankruptcy. Demonstrators have gathered outside his estate demanding accountability. The shopkeeper changed the channel, and the screen lit up with a cartoon. Rex kept staring a few seconds longer, then lowered his head. He padded closer to the shop window, sniffing as if the man's scent could somehow reach him through the glass. That night the city's streets were wet with drizzle. Rex wandered restlessly, drawn toward the business district. Tall buildings loomed over the streets, their glass walls gleaming with rain. The steps of Kane Tower, once crowded with photographers and sleek cars, were now littered with signs that read "Pay us back" and "Justice for workers." Rex waited near the steps, but Joseph Kane never came out. A security guard shooed him away with a wave of his hand. Rex trotted down the alley, then paused and looked back at the darkened lobby behind the glass doors. The following days brought more images on the shop's TV screens. Joseph Kane leaving court surrounded by reporters. Joseph Kane's mansion gates closed while protesters shouted outside. Joseph Kane sitting silently in the back seat of an ordinary sedan instead of the glossy black car. Rex watched them all. At night, he returned to the same streets, his paws splashing through puddles. He could not have explained why he lingered near Kane Tower or why he stared at the gates of the mansion. He only remembered the smell of roasted chicken, the man's eyes meeting his, the quiet nod before the car drove away. One rainy afternoon, the protests grew worse. Crowds filled the square in front of the courthouse, their umbrellas black against the gray sky. Some chanted slogans, others pounded on the hoods of parked cars. A sleek car pushed slowly through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Rex, hiding beneath a stairway across the street, lifted his head and saw the familiar profile of the man inside. The car moved forward as the crowd closed in on all sides. For a moment, Rex's tail wagged, a flicker of recognition and hope. But the car disappeared into the underground parking lot, and the crowd's angry roar swallowed the sound of the engine. The days grew colder. Food became harder to find. One night, exhausted and wet, Rex curled beneath a rusty gate near the riverbank. The moon broke through the clouds and silvered the water. In his half-sleep, he dreamed of that first night at the dump, the quiet street, the smell of fresh bread, the man's calm gaze. When he woke, the dream clung to him like a scent trail he could not follow. A week later, while searching for scraps near a cafe's back door, Rex heard a man's voice behind him. He turned, ears alert, but saw only a pair of delivery workers unloading crates. Yet the tone, that deep, measured tone, stirred something in his memory. He followed the workers down the street, hoping to catch that voice again. But they disappeared into the back of another shop. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the shopkeeper across the street turned his TVs to the news once more. Rex drifted closer, drawn by the glow. Sources confirm that Joseph Kane has sold most of his remaining properties to pay debts. Reports suggest he has moved into a modest apartment in the East District. The screen showed a grainy image of Kane stepping out of an old sedan in a rain-stained overcoat. Gone was the sleek car, the fine suit, the watch that had once gleamed on his wrist. The man's shoulders were slightly stooped. He looked older, wearier. Rex pressed his nose close to the glass, fogging it with his breath. He gave a soft whine. People passing on the sidewalk barely noticed the skinny dog staring at the TV. That night, while the city's lights flickered over wet streets, Rex padded toward the East District. His paws carried him past alleys, markets, and shuttered shops, following some instinct stronger than hunger. The East District was older, the buildings smaller and patched with peeling paint. Windows glowed weakly behind thin curtains. The smell of cooking rice drifted from cramped apartments. Rex trotted along a narrow lane, sniffing the ground at every step. He paused near a low building with a cracked wooden door and a single weak light above it. The smell was faint but familiar, the scent of the man who had once tossed him a sandwich. He sat down across the street, ears tilted forward, watching the door. The door opened briefly as a neighbor stepped out to dump a bucket of water into the gutter. Through the narrow gap, Rex glimpsed a figure moving inside, a man hanging his coat on a chair, shoulders sagging as if from long defeat. Rex's tail thumped once against the ground. He didn't move closer. Not yet. He only watched until the door closed and the light in the window went dim. For the first time in many nights, Rex curled up nearby not from exhaustion, but from choice. The air smelled of damp concrete and rain-wet iron, but beneath it lingered that faint trace he remembered, the scent of the man who had once fed him. He rested his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on the quiet building. He did not know why the man now lived here, or why his clothes looked plain and his shoulders heavy. He only knew the man was near. The first time Rex tried to approach the small apartment, Joe shut the door on him. It was a cold evening, the street lamp buzzing weakly above the narrow lane. Joe had stepped out to toss a plastic bag of trash into the gutter. When he turned back, he found the dog sitting a few feet away, tail low, ears tilted forward. "Go on," Joe muttered, waving his hand. "Shoo." Rex didn't move. Joe sighed, went back inside, and slammed the door. Rex lay down where he was, curling his body against the wall for warmth. By the third evening, Joe noticed the same shape outside his window. He opened the door again, frowning at the dog sitting quietly in the drizzle. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice rough. "I've got nothing to give you." Rex's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. His tail stirred, then fell still again. Joe rubbed a hand across his tired face and closed the door without another word. Nights grew colder. Rex kept returning, always waiting in the same spot. Sometimes he wandered off to scavenge from trash cans, but by dusk he would be back near the door, as if tied to it by an invisible thread. The neighbors began to notice. One old woman shook her head and said to Joe in passing, "That dog's loyal to you for some reason. Maybe you should let him in before winter gets worse." Joe grunted in reply, pretending not to care. But late one night, when he stepped out to lock the gate, he saw Rex lying there, his fur damp, his ribs faintly showing in the thin light. Joe stood there a long moment, silent. Finally he muttered, "Fine. Come in if you must." He left the door ajar. Rex hesitated, then padded forward cautiously. His paws made no sound on the worn wooden floor. Joe fetched an old blanket from a closet and laid it in a corner. "That's all I can offer," he said, almost gruffly. Rex lowered himself onto the blanket, curled up, and let out a soft sigh. For the first time in weeks, Joe did not feel entirely alone. In the days that followed, Rex kept close to Joe. He waited by the door when Joe went out looking for work. He followed him down the narrow lanes to the small grocery store. He even sat quietly near the table while Joe ate plain bread and tea. At first, Joe ignored the dog's steady gaze. But one rainy afternoon, as he came back from another fruitless job hunt, he found Rex sitting by the window, watching the rain. The sight tugged at something in him, a memory of a night long ago, when he had stopped his car by the dump and tossed a half-eaten sandwich to a skinny stray. Joe knelt beside Rex and patted his damp fur. "Guess you remember me, huh?" he said quietly. Rex leaned into the touch, eyes half closing. Something shifted in the silence between them. That night, as the wind rattled the window, Rex lay on his blanket, but did not sleep. His eyes were open, fixed on the shadows on the wall. In the flicker of the dim street lamp outside, memories stirred. He remembered a different house, vast, warm, full of light. He remembered the smell of polished wood, the softness of a thick carpet beneath his paws, and the deep laugh of a man who used to kneel beside him and scratch behind his ears. David, the man who had once been everything to him. Rex remembered sitting by David's side as he worked late at night, papers spread across a grand desk. He remembered running across a sprawling lawn as David threw a ball for him again and again, laughing. But he also remembered the change. David's voice raised in anger behind closed doors. Julia's sharp laughter as she turned away. The way she slammed the door the night she left, leaving David standing in the hallway with a look that Rex could not understand but never forgot. He remembered the day David showed him the hidden room behind a wall panel in the old countryside estate, a small steel locker set into the wall. David had smiled then, ruffling Rex's ears. "This is our little secret," he had said softly. "Someday it might save us." Rex didn't understand the words, but he remembered the smell of the cold metal door and the way David's voice had carried a trace of hope. And finally, he remembered the accident, the sharp screech of tires, the shattering glass, the terrible stillness that followed. When Rex had crawled out from the wrecked car, David had not moved. Rex's eyes blinked slowly in the dim apartment. His tail thumped once, then lay still. The next morning, Joe found Rex sitting at the window again, staring at nothing. "Strange dog," he muttered. He set down a chipped bowl with some rice and bits of leftover chicken.
"Here, eat."
Rex turned his head, sniffed, and ate quietly. Joe sat down opposite him with his own plain breakfast. For a long time they ate in silence. Days passed. Joe found odd jobs here and there, delivering packages, fixing a neighbor's leaky faucet, but money remained scarce. He learned to share his meager meals with Rex without complaint. Sometimes, as he sat late at night sorting through unpaid bills, he would look at the dog curled up in the corner and say softly, "I guess we're both strays now." Rex would lift his head at the sound of his voice, then rest it back on his paws. One evening, as they sat in the quiet apartment, the distant wail of a siren drifted through the streets. Joe leaned back in his chair, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. "You know," he said to the dog, "there was a time I thought nothing could touch me. I had everything. Houses, cars, people begging for my signature. Now," he gestured at the cramped room. "This." Rex tilted his head, ears twitching. Joe gave a faint, crooked smile. "You probably wouldn't understand, but maybe you do." For the first time, Rex moved closer, resting his head lightly against Joe's knee. Joe's hand came to rest on Rex's neck almost without thinking. That night Joe slept more soundly than he had in weeks. Rex curled near his bed, his breathing deep and steady. The soft rhythm of it filled the room, like the steady beat of a heart. The days that followed were harsh, cold winds, long hours of work for little pay, but a new quiet companionship grew between man and dog. Neighbors noticed the change. "That stray's become your shadow," one man said with a laugh. "Looks like he chose you." Joe only smiled faintly, but in his heart he felt a fragile sense of purpose he thought he had lost forever. As winter deepened, Rex sometimes dreamed again of the hidden locker behind the wall and of David's kind eyes. He didn't know why, but the memory lingered like a half-remembered trail waiting to be followed. For now, though, he stayed by Joe's side, as if he had finally found another soul as lost as his own. Winter loosened its grip slowly. The snow along the city streets turned to gray slush, the air damp and cold, but no longer bitter. Joe worked longer hours delivering parcels, his shoulders stooped from exhaustion, but in the evenings he always returned to the little apartment where Rex waited by the door, tail giving a single wag of greeting. One evening Joe came home later than usual. He set a paper bag of groceries on the table and sat heavily in the wooden chair. "We're almost out of everything again," he muttered. "Rent's late. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Rex lay quietly in his usual spot by the stove. His ears twitched at Joe's voice. For a long moment, he stared at the flickering shadows on the wall as if searching for something lost. Then he got up, padded across the room, and nudged Joe's knee with his nose. Joe looked down at him and gave a faint, tired smile. "What is it, boy? You hungry too?" Rex moved to the door and looked back, tail wagging once, then trotted a few steps toward the hallway. He paused and glanced over his shoulder again. Joe frowned. "You want to go out now? In this weather?" Rex barked softly, a low, urgent sound, and padded to the door again. Joe sighed, pulled on his worn jacket, and grabbed a flashlight. "All right, show me what's so important." The streets were slick with half-melted snow. Rex led the way without hesitation, paws splashing through shallow puddles, nose low as if following an invisible scent. Joe followed, his breath fogging in the cold air. They walked for nearly an hour, leaving the crowded district behind and reaching the outskirts of the city where older houses sat dark and silent behind rusting gates. Finally, Rex stopped at the edge of a cracked driveway that led to a weather-stained stone house. The windows were boarded up. Weeds choked what had once been a garden. Joe stood still, puzzled. "I know this place. I drove past it years ago, back when I still had my company. What are we doing here?" Rex padded up the driveway, tail held low but steady. He stopped at a section of wall near the side porch, sniffed at the bricks, and then pawed gently at the crumbling mortar. Joe came closer, shining the flashlight. "What is it, boy?" "There's nothing here." But as the beam swept across the wall, Joe noticed a faint outline, the shape of a narrow door set flush against the bricks. The wood was weather-worn but still solid. Rex looked up at Joe, eyes steady, then back at the door. Joe's heart began to pound. He set the flashlight down and pushed at the door. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder, until the swollen wood shifted with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow storage space beyond. A short flight of steps led down into a small room that smelled of dust and damp earth. Rex trotted down the steps without hesitation. Joe followed, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. On the far wall was a plain wooden panel. Rex went straight to it and pawed at the lower edge. Joe crouched down and found a small latch. Behind the panel was a steel locker, its surface cold and faintly rusted, but the dial and handle were intact. Joe stared at it in astonishment. "Where did you come from, boy? How would you even know this was here?" Rex sat back on his haunches and gazed at the locker as if waiting. Joe hesitated. The dial turned stiffly beneath his fingers. He tried a few random numbers, but nothing happened. He sat back on his heels, frustration washing over him. Rex tilted his head, then, as if remembering, padded a few steps away to a dusty shelf where an old photograph lay face down beneath a layer of grime. Joe picked it up and brushed the dust away. It showed a younger man, stern but kind-eyed, with one hand resting on a German shepherd's head. The man's other arm was draped loosely around a smiling woman in a summer dress. Something about the picture made Joe's throat tighten. On the back of the frame, faded but still legible, was a sequence of numbers written in careful pen strokes. Joe stared at it for a long moment, then slowly turned back to the locker. With hands that trembled slightly, he set the dial to the faded numbers. When he turned the handle this time, the mechanism clicked, and the heavy door swung open with a slow metallic groan. Inside, neat stacks of cash were bound with faded paper bands. A few small velvet boxes held jewelry that still glinted in the flashlight's beam. Joe exhaled a shaky breath. Good Lord, whoever you belong to. Boy, he was ready for a rainy day. Rex gave a soft whine, ears tilted forward, as if he recognized the scent that drifted from the open locker. Joe knelt beside him and laid a hand gently on his neck. Looks like you just saved both of us. In the weeks that followed, Joe carefully moved the money and valuables to a bank deposit box, paying off his debts and renting a better place to live. He found an honest accountant, rebuilt a small part of his business, and began to hold his head up again when he walked through the streets. Through it all, Rex never left his side. The dog seemed calmer now, as if some unspoken duty had been fulfilled. But Joe noticed, on certain evenings when the house grew quiet, Rex would go to the back door and stare out into the distance, his ears tilted slightly back, eyes reflecting some thought far away. One night, as Joe worked at his desk reviewing new contracts, he said quietly, "Whoever that man was, the one who hid the money, I think you loved him. Maybe this was your way of honoring him." Rex raised his head from the rug, blinked slowly, and laid it down again. Spring came early that year. The city's trees sprouted tender green leaves, and soft rain swept the streets clean. Joe's business grew steadily. His name began to appear again in the papers, not as the man who had lost everything, but as one who had rebuilt with quiet determination. Old rivals and the woman named Julia, who had once mocked him, now saw his strength return. But on a mild Sunday morning, Joe found Rex standing by the door, tail low, waiting. "You want to walk?" Joe asked. Rex trotted ahead as soon as the door opened, leading Joe through familiar streets, then across the river, then down a long, narrow lane to a small hilltop cemetery. Joe followed silently, sensing the dog's purpose. At the far end of the path stood a modest headstone, clean but simple, set beneath an old oak tree. The carved name was almost worn smooth by the years and weather, but still legible. David Clark. Joe stood still, the cool wind stirring his coat. Rex went forward slowly and lowered himself onto the grass before the stone. He rested his head on his paws and lay there, silent and unmoving. For a long while Joe said nothing. He simply watched, the weight of the moment pressing quietly against his chest. At last he spoke, his voice low. "So you brought me to the man who once saved for the future, and I suppose, in a way, You brought me to thank him. Rex's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but he did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the name carved in the stone. The sun slipped westward, turning the sky a pale gold. A breeze rattled the young leaves of the oak tree. Joe placed a gentle hand on Rex's shoulder. Come on, boy. He'd want us to keep going. Rex rose slowly, gave one last look at the headstone, and then turned to walk beside Joe. As they made their way back down the hill, the last light of day glinted on the river below, and for the first time in a long while, the path ahead seemed open, as if two lives, one man's and one dog's, had both found their road forward.